Greetings, my fellow freeloaders and sovereign thinkers. This is LL3's newest podcast. My name is Craig, transmitting from the beautiful swampy mangroves of South Florida. And today's date, again, Wednesday, June 1st, 2016. Yeah, looks like I decided to do another episode for the hell of it. Actually, a few things that's got my attention, so it's really intriguing what's been happening when I get all this information and get inspired by what's going on in the world. It's going to be a pretty short segment, or a short episode to be very exact. So let's just start off right now. This came from the Intercept.com. And it's by Jeremy Shahil, which is entitled Pentagon Special Ops Killing of Pregnant Afghan Women Was Appropriate Use of Force. An internal Defense Department investigation into one of the most notorious night raids conducted by Special Operations Forces in Afghanistan, in which 7 civilians were killed, including 2 pregnant women, determined that all U.S. soldiers involved had followed the rules of engagement. As a result, the soldiers faced no disciplinary measures, according to hundreds of pages of Defense Department documents obtained by the Intercept. There's a link for that too, so if you want to check it out. Through the Freedom of Information Act, in the aftermath of the raid, Admiral William McRaven, at the time the commander of the Elite Joint Special Operations Command, took responsibility for the operation. The document made no under-redacted mention of JSOC, although 2 children were shot during the raid, and multiple witnesses and Afghanistan investigators alleged that U.S. soldiers dug bullets out of the body of at least one of the dead pregnant women. Defense Department investigators concluded that the amount of force utilized was necessary, proportional, and applied at appropriate time. The investigation did acknowledge that tactical mistakes were made. The Defense Department's conclusion bears a resemblance to U.S. Central Command's findings in the aftermath of the horrifying attack on a Médecins Sans Frontières hospital in Kunduz, Afghanistan, last October, in which 42 patients and medical workers were killed in a sustained barrage of strikes by an AC-130. The Pentagon has announced that no criminal charges will be brought against any members of the military for the Kunduz strike. CENTCOM's Kunduz investigation concluded that the incident resulted from a combination of unintentional human errors, process errors, and equipment failures. CENTCOM denied the attack constituted a war crime, a claim challenged by international law experts and SF. There's a photo for it if you want to check it out. One of the photos here. The February 2010 night raid, which took place in the village near Gardez in Patkita province, was described by the U.S. military at the time as a heroic attack against Taliban militants. A press release published by NATO and Afghanistan soon after the raid asserted that a joint Afghanistan international operation had made a gruesome discovery. According to NATO, the force entered a compound near the village of Kabtaba after intelligence had confirmed it to be the site of the militant activity. As the team approached, they were engaged in a firefight by several insurgents. The Americans killed the insurgents and were secured the area when they made their discovery. 3 women who had been bound and gagged and then executed inside the compound. The U.S. force, the press release alleged to found the women hidden in an adjacent room. The story was picked and spread throughout the media. A senior U.S. military official told CNN that the bodies had the earmarks of a traditional honor killing. And there's photos and all that, 2 documents. Just hit that link there. But the raid quickly gained international infamy after survivors and local Afghan investigators began offering a completely different narrative of the deadly events that night to a British reporter. Jerome Starkey, who began a serious investigation of the Gardez killings. When I visited Starkey in Kabul, he told me that the first he saw no reason to discount the official story. I thought it was worth investigating because if that press release was true, a mass killings, 3 women killed by Taliban who were then killed by special forces. Then that in itself would made an extraordinary and intriguing story. But when he traveled to Gardez and began assembling witnesses to meet him in the area, he immediately realized NATO's story was likely false. Starkey's reporting, which first uncovered the horrifying details of what happened that night, forced NATO and the U.S. military to abandon the honor killings cover story. A half-hearted official investigation ensued. Witnesses and survivors describe an unprovoked assault on the family compound of Mohammed Daoud Sharabuddin, a police officer who had just received an important promotion. So Daoud and his family had gathered to celebrate the naming of a newborn son, a ritual that takes place on the sixth day of a child's life. Unlike the predominantly Pashtun Taliban, the Sharabuddin family were ethnic Tajiks, and their main language was Dari. Many of the men in the family were clean-shaven or wore only mustaches, and they had long opposed the Taliban. Dawad, the police commander, had gone through dozens of U.S. training programs, and his home was filled with photos of himself with American soldiers. Another family member was a prosecutor of the U.S.-backed local government and the third of the vice chancellor at the local university. There's a photo of this gentleman himself. At about 3:30 a.m., when the family heard noises outside their compound, Dodd and his 15-year-old son, Sadiqullah, fearing a Taliban attack, went outside to investigate. Both were immediately hit with sniper fire. All the children are shouting, Dawad is shot, Dawad is shot. Dawad, brother-in-law Tahir, recalled when I visited the family compound in 2010, Dawad, the eldest son, was behind his father and younger brother when they were hit. When my father went down, I screamed. He told me, everybody, my uncles, the women, everybody come out of the home to run to the corridors of the house. I sprinted to them and warned them not to come out as there were Americans attacking and they would kill them. Within a matter of minutes, a family celebration had become a massacre. 7 people died, including 3 women and 2 people who later succumbed to their injuries. 2 of the women had been pregnant. 16 children lost their mothers. The Americans were still present when survivors prepared burial shrouds for those who had died. Afghan customs involved binding the feet and head. A scarf secured around the bottom of the chin is meant to keep the mouth of the deceased from hanging open. They managed to do this before the Americans began handcuffing them and dividing the surviving men and women into separate areas. Several of the male family members told me that it was around this time that they witnessed a horrifying scene. U.S. soldiers digging the bullets out of the woman's body. They were putting knives into their injuries. They take out the bullets. Sabur told me. I asked him bluntly, you saw Americans digging the bullets out of the women's bodies? Without hesitation, he said yes. Tahir told me he saw the Americans with knives standing over the bodies. They were taking out the bullets from their bodies to remove the proof of their crime. The U.S. military internal investigation into the raid, which was described in detail in the documents obtained by The Intercept, was ordered by General Stanley McChrystal, the former commander of the Joint Special Operations Command, who at the time of the raid was the commander of all international forces in Afghanistan. The lead investigator, whose identity was redacted, noted at the beginning of the report that he did not visit the scene of the raid, saying that the risk of reawakening emotional and political turmoil would not have been worth the cost. Instead, family members of the victims were asked to travel to a U.S. base to be interviewed. The document's redactions and omissions are perhaps more interesting than the conclusions of the investigation. U.S. Central Command released 535 pages, including more than 100 photographs taken at the scene, but withheld nearly 400 additional pages, stating that they are exempt from FOIA for the national security reasons. Photographs of bodies and wounds were redacted. The documents include needle press releases and talking points claiming that the victims of the attack were Taliban militants and offering the standard assurance that coalition forces take every precaution to ensure non-combatant civilians are protected from possible hostilities during the course of every operation, and Aaron Laden questions and answers. Documents stated that during the operation, 2 militants killed and 1 wounded, and women and 2 children were protected. At least a list of 2 talking points titled Post-Operation I.O. and Mitigation characterize the area tribe in the following terms. One PhD described them as great robbers and utter savages, and that their country was formerly refuge for bad characters. There's the documents right here as well. You can see that yourselves. All right, so if you folks make their own decision. While the investigation asserted that the soldiers did not dig any bullets out of the bodies of the dead, the sections of the investigation addressing this allegation were almost entirely redacted. The investigation found that the survivors interviewed in the raid's aftermath referred to as detainees, providing credible testimony. The report also noted consistencies in all 8 detainees' statements that would be impossible to pre-plan without prior knowledge specifics of the operation, adding that the detained reports corroborate that the women died when they tried to stop Zahir, one of the men killed, from exiting the building. Despite this assessment of the credibility of the survivors' testimony, the Pentagon investigation dismissed outright the statements from multiple witnesses, including the husband of one of the dead women, that the Americans dug bullets from the women's bodies. This investigation found no attempt to hide or cover up the circumstances of the local national women's deaths. The executive summary of the investigation concluded that investigators were instructed by the main U.S. command at Bagram to determine did anyone alter, clean, or otherwise tamper with the scene in any way following the operation, and if so, why? The answer to that question was clearly redacted. Like it says here on some of the questions here, was anyone injured or killed? There were 2 militants killed and 1 wounded. What are the names of the detainees? Militants often go by different aliases, so it can be difficult to determine their identities until thoroughly questioned and individually processed from them for detention. Were any women and children present? There were 1 women and 2 children protected. Were there participating units from? To protect possible future operations. We will not discuss the stage and location or composition of forces. How and then were the 3 women killed? The women were found when the force entered. It appeared they had been dead for some time. There will have to be an investigation to determine cause and approximate death of date. Was it interesting there, huh? Oh, yeah. All right. So it says here the investigation did note, however, that the Afghan investigation conducted immediately after the raids reports that an American bullet was found in the body of one of the dead women, but it does not say how that bullet was found or who removed it from the woman. Citing statements from members of the strike force that conducted the raid, the investigators asserted there is no evidence to support that bullet were removed from the bodies by anyone associated with U.S. forces. Initial press release on the raid contained erroneous information about the women being bound and gagged, according to the investigation, because the ground force was confused by the unfamiliar sight of the women prepared so quickly for burial and firmly believed that they did not kill the 3 women. The investigation concluded that the assumption that the women had been killed by Afghan and placed on the scene was an honest assessment and the result of a lack of cultural awareness, not an attempt to mislead higher headquarters. And it's interesting to have the roll-up here about the how many guns, the magazines, and all that good stuff. And it's the inventory of the Gadar's operation. According to the instructions provided to investigators, the U.S. forces claimed the women had been killed as many as 2 days before the raid occurred. But the report observed that their remains were collocated with IKEA, enemies killed in action, and photos taken in the immediate aftermath show the women with wounds indicating that had been killed during the raid. Was this an attempt to deceive? That question was not answered in the documents provided by the Pentagon, at least not in an unredacted format. The report also noted a curious contradiction. One of the men killed by American forces had been prepared for burial just as the dead women were, with a cloth wrap tied around his head so his jaw would remain closed. Yet, when the U.S. forces first reported on the raid, they described only the women as having their heads bound and suggested their deaths were the result of a cultural custom. The cause of death listed for the men was gunshot wounds to the chest. For the 3 women, the cause of death was wounds. The most credible theory, according to the final report, was that the women were killed in a shoot-through once raid had begun, and that their deaths were unintentional and unknown to the shooters. It's undeniable that 5 innocent people were killed and 2 innocent men were wounded in the conduct of this operation. The report stated to simply call this regrettable would be callous. It is much more than that. However, the unique chain of events that led to their deaths is explicable. According to the report, the university official who was at the party inside the compound called the police headquarters in Pakita as the raid was beginning because he believed the house was coming under attack from the Taliban. All witnesses interviewed stated that Mohammed Daoud, the Afghan police commander, left the party and entered the courtyard, believing he was confronting a Taliban attack. Still, the investigation concluded that U.S. forces were justified in shooting him, as well as his cousin Mohammed Sanawaz Zahir, the local prosecutor. The investigators found that the men showed a hostile intent because they were armed with rifles. What? Pretty fucking illogical. Excuse my language. Pretty damn illogical, I would say. In the end, the investigation determined that American forces had followed the rules of engagement and standard operating procedures during the raid, concluding that there were tactical mistakes made. The investigation recommended that the coalition forces make an operative condolence payment to the family as a sign of good faith and our sincerity at the seriousness of the incident. Because of the excessive redactions, these documents fail to answer many questions. While the reports reference special forces, the specific unit was redacted. The report also seemed to indicate that the strike force came from a base in another province rather than the local base in Paquita, yet offered no explanation. The letter accompanying the documents provided to the Intercept stated that some documents could not be released because they would expose interagencies and intra-agencies memorandum, what another agencies were involved in this raid, and subsequent management of the fallout and investigation, who provided the Americans with the intelligence to let to the raid, which claimed that the Taliban facilitator was present. No explanation was given for why the documents, which were requested by SOCOM, the parent command of GSOC, under the Federal Freedom of Information Act in March 2011, were not only released after being reviewed by another unnamed agency. The report noted that there are considerable questions about the cause of the female's deaths and male injuries, as well as multiple inconsistencies between that was observed and what has since been reported by local nationals. If the women were killed by U.S. forces, even a shoot through what happened to the bullets. The report stated that the throat of one of the women had been slit with a knife and that another dead body contained knife marks on the chest. Where did the lacerations come from? One investigator observed a blood splatter pattern that appeared to be more consistent with blunt force trauma and suggested that some had possibly slipped on the ice and split open his or her head on the hard concrete. If that is truly what the splatter indicated, then which person will receive those injuries. If the investigators determined the surviving witnesses of the raid were convincing and credible when there was testimony about Americans digging bullets out of the women's dead bodies discarded. Mohammed Sabar was one of the men singled out for further interrogation after the raid. With his clothes still caked with the blood of his loved one, Sabar and 7 other men were hooded and shackled. They tied our hands and blindfolded us, he recalled. 2 people grabbed us and pushed us one by one into the helicopter. They were flown to a different Afghan province, Patika, where the Americans held them for days. My senses weren't working at all, he recalled. I couldn't cry. I was numb. I didn't eat for 3 days and nights. They didn't give us water to wash the blood away. The Americans ran biometric tests on the men, photographed their irises, and took their fingerprints. Sabar described how teams of interrogators, including both Americans and Afghans, questioned him about his family connection to the Taliban. Sabar told them that his family was against the Taliban, he fought the Taliban, and that some relatives had been kidnapped by the Taliban. The interrogators had short beards and didn't wear uniforms. They had big muscles and would fly into sudden rages. Sabar recalled it, adding that they shook him violently at times. We told him truthfully that there were not Taliban in our home. One of the Americans, he said, told him had intelligence that a suicide bomber had hidden in your house and that he was planning in an operation. Sabar told him, if we would have a suicide bomber at our home, then would we be playing music in our house? Almost all guests were government employees. By the time Mohammed Sabar returned home after being held in American custody, he missed the burial of his wife and other family members. The Pentagon investigation stands in stark contrast to an independent investigation conducted by the United Nations team, which determined that the survivors of the raid suffered from cruel, inhuman, and degrading treatment by being physically assaulted by U.S. and Afghan forces, restrained and forced to stand bare feet for several hours outside the code. The UN investigation adds that witnesses allege that U.S. and Afghan forces refused to provide adequate and timely medical support to 2 people who sustained serious bullet injuries, resulting in their deaths hours later. The Pentagon investigation did note that 3 of the survivors detained stated they had been tortured by special forces, but that allegation was buried below statements attributed to the other survivors who said being held by the American forces felt like home, like prisoner. felt like home, not like prisoner, and they were treated very well. In the end, the commander of the Joint Special Operations Command, Vice Admiral William McRaven, or Vice Minister, whatever you want to call it, McRaven, visited the compound in Gardiz, accompanied by phalanx of Afghan and U.S. soldiers. He made an offer to the family to sacrifice a sheep, which his force had brought them on a truck to ask forgiveness. Months later, when I sat with the family elder, Haji Sharabuddin, at his home, his anger seemed only to be hardened. I don't accept their apology. I will not trade my son for the whole kingdom of the United States, he told me, holding a picture of his sons. Initially, we were thinking that Americans were the friends of Afghans, but now we think the Americans themselves are terrorists. Americans are our enemy. They bring terror and destruction. Americans not only destroyed my house, they destroyed my family. The Americans unleashed the special forces on us. These special forces with long beards did cruel criminal things. We called them the American Taliban, added Mohammed Tahir, the father of Galalali, one of the slain women. The internal investigation ordered by General McChrystal into the Gardes raid is a complete unaccounting of this horrifying incident. It is only based on the word on the force that carried out the killings, whose personnel could face serious charges under Uniform Code of Military Justice if investigators had taken seriously survivors' allegations. Some of the portions of the articles were adapted by Shaw's 2014 book, Dirty Wars. Really, you have to look at this in a lot more than, I would say, one way. When will the United States stop being an empire? When are we going to tell our commanders in NATO to stick it? And anyone else going to tell us how to think and when to wipe our butts? We got to bring all our troops home. This war on terror is a conflagration with ourselves, within the United States, and around the world. You see this a lot, or read this a lot. I've been reading a lot of these areas of governmental terrorism or bullies. And many people still will raise their hands and their hearts and go, yes, I support a police state and an empire, but I still love my country. I'm not saying condemn your nation on its roots. But what's happening now is just part of the military-industrial complex. Kio bono, who benefits? The tyrants within our empire. The one world order or new world order, whatever you want to call it. They're the ones who are manifesting this more. And if it hits the United States or others in North America, I can say a good example. Waco massacres. Very good example. It's justifiable. I find it unacceptable. And they get medals for it. These treasonous parasites. We need to bring our troops home completely. And I recall Ron Paul saying that. He's a Vietnam veteran himself. I remember all those crackpots, GOP supporters and Democrats were ridiculing the people I support like Ron Paul. And look what's happening now. Well, the people you worship and bow to are going to end it? I don't think so. But as long as you got your football, your sports, and your bogus entertaining movies, the Church of Hollywood, it wouldn't matter. In good faith, these individuals need to be brought to justice. Because if you let this happen, and let it slide, it could happen again within our own soil. What are we going to say about that? Next one of my friends came from antiwar.com. Taliban attack Afghan court after vowing revenge for executions. Day after the Taliban issued a statement vowing revenge for a series of executions detained of Taliban fighters by the Afghan government, Taliban forces attacked the court in the city of Ghazni, sparking a gun battle that left 11 people dead overall. The attack began with a suicide bomber blasting through the gate of the courthouse, with 4 more Taliban quickly fighting their way inside. Over the course of the battle, the 4 other Taliban gunmen were killed, along with policemen and 5 civilian bystanders. Ghazni Police Chief Aminullah Amra Kahil presented the operation as a quick win for the police, saying they shot dead the other bombers in no time. The Taliban hasn't commented on the attack, but the fact that they hit a courthouse and was likely the objective. Taliban attacks were described as wearing barracks with military uniforms underneath, apparently an attempt to disguise themselves as women to get to the site without attracting security attention. An attempt that was clearly successful. The first bomber hit at the gate before any firing began. Wow, more bloodshed happening in that country. It's really something else, my friends. And who's funding the Taliban? We can say the CIA, we can say the One World Order, doesn't matter. But it's all propaganda control. The people of Afghanistan want to live in peace. They're tired of this garbage, sacrilegious practices. And this is why I always tell folks you have to always look at things a lot broader than what it is. It's a real shame we got good people die, especially innocent, but 5 civilian bystanders and a policeman. That's part of war, I would say, urban warfare. Innocent people are going to get killed. But one thing for sure, this whole thing has to stop in Afghanistan and the world. When people are going to start thinking about this, look at the bigger picture. And, hey, man, imperialism, one big deception. I don't know. I'm just getting a little bit disturbed in these areas. But I got some positive news here. From freebeacon.com came out yesterday by Natalie Johnson. It's entitled Supreme Court Deals Blow to Obama's Administration's Environmental Agenda. The Supreme Court ruled Tuesday that landowners can appeal to a federal court when the government subjects their property to wetlands regulations requiring additional permits. The unanimous ruling determined that the Clean Water Act imposes substantial criminal and civil penalties for discharging any pollutants to the water covered by federal regulations without a permit from the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. The decision could weaken the Obama administration's environmental agenda. Ha 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 ha. The Corps is in the charge of assessing whether landowner's property contains waters of the United States or navigable waters, which are protected under the Clean Water Act. Its officials decide that those water falls under federal protections. The government will issue property owners' jurisdiction determinations, which require individuals to obtain permits to use their own wetlands. What? That means, we gotta have permission. Yeah, okay, Daddy. Can I dig a hole so I can bury my time capsule? The Hill reported the key dispute in Supreme Court case was whether a jurisdictional determination carries a legal consequence, a necessary component in order for the decision to be final agency action. The Obama administration argued that since new information can change the finding, it is not like final actions. But writing for the court, Chief Justice John Roberts wrote that since the finding is definite and binding on the federal government agencies, it satisfies the requirement. The opponents of the Obama administration's environmental policies hailed the Army Corps of Engineers vs. Hawks Company decision as a victory for property rights and individual liberty. For more than 40 years, millions of landowners nationwide have had no meaningful way to challenge lawful application to the Federal Clean Water Act to their land. They have to put at the mercy of the government because land covered by the Act is subject to complete federal control. Principal Attorney M. Reed Hopper of the conservative Pacific Legal Foundation said in a statement Tuesday that this victory guarantees rights of millions of property owners. And here's the one thing for sure about the whole water thing, Clean Water Act. Is it considered unconstitutional? In my observation, yes. I don't need a permit, as long as I don't bother or hurt the land itself. All right? This is a 10 states' rights issue, 10th Amendment. Not some feds know best. Come on, give me a confounded break. But one thing I like that landowners can challenge, and the Obama administration don't like it. Oh, you bureaucratic pieces of trash out there. You know what? Who the hell cares what you think? The landowner's a lot smarter than you. Why? Because you push a pencil and you live in the concretes of this District of Columbia? Who the hell cares? So that's one thing I like. I disagree. You have to have a permit. Okay, have to have permission. Hey, Daddy, can I pick my nose? Come on, that's more of a privilege right there. However, one thing I like it is the landowners can fight for what's right. So I will give that a thumbs up in that aspect. All right. Well, that is all for now. I know I've been pretty quick. Yeah, half hour. Okay, that's not too bad. A little over half hour. So I'd like to thank everyone for listening. So please feel free to download and share this episode throughout your social media networks and the rest of my archives as well. If you have any questions, comments, compliments, criticisms, love letters, hate letters, or you want to send me something that's pretty interesting that I haven't talked about, whatever you do, please send your correspondences with decorum. You can hit me on Facebook, Twitter, Google+, Spreaker, iHeartRadio, YouTube, Tumblr, Freedoms Network, Scene.life. And I think that's all I got, right? Yeah, that's all I got. You can just type in Local Luck 3 in a search and you'll find all these social media groups I'm in. All right? Or you can email me at LokiLuck3, all together with the number 3 at gmail.com. I'm going to play a song by Brandon Perry. I like his stuff. He's from They Can Dance. Utopia. I guess we can all relate to it, right? Absolutely. So I'm going to play the song before I sign off. And once again, I thank you for your time. Plus, always remember that demoniac resistance is healthy for the soul and can liberate humanity. Until next time, take care of yourselves. Keep on spreading the love, and may your guardian spirits be with you.
Sum of all my parts, a domestic beast with a hairy heart, trapped within a walled suburbia. I found my taste is somewhat underground, between the shadows and the cracks. I am building my utopia. I need to break free from all that binds, that makes me old before my time, in this world of dystopia. My love is like a bright guiding light, shining in the darkness of the night, the star of my utopia. And the motion of the sea, in the air that we breathe, can you feel me? And the stars and in the trees, in the song of the bees, can you hear me? you're the sum of all my parts, a space jockey from a distant star, marooned upon dystopia. I've found my taste of someone